Salt for days. You're welcome. I have been tardy with my homework. Badly, I'm very bad. We haven't done a tops and bottoms on this here channel in a minute. And a minute would be since March. But believe me, I did not stop having opinions between March and right now. So let's talk about what some of those opinions are. And welcome to a new video. Or should I say, welcome to part 1 of my makeup exam. You see, somehow I have fallen out of the habit of giving you my monthly wrap up. I would say I'm not entirely sure how it happened, but I kind of am. And it's mostly to do with the fact that this year, for whatever reason, my brain is like, yo girl, you're gonna be the reread queen of booktube. Everything the light touches will be rereads. And although I haven't done the maths on percentage wise how much of my reading this year has been reread, I'm gonna guess that it's pretty high. And you know what, I had a lot of stress about this for a little while, but once again I think that was just pressure that I was putting on myself, because I think you guys are mostly just happy if I'm talking about any books at all, whether I loved them or whether I didn't. Which brings me to what this video is, because this is very much the I didn't love them portion of my tops and bottoms for the last few months. Unlike in life, there are actually too many tops to put the tops and bottoms all in one video. Is it a queer joke? If you didn't get it, just nod and play along, which is my coping strategy for life, by the way. Just nod and play along. Eventually it all comes out in the wash. So this video is going to be entirely made up of salty opinions. So much salt, just like liberally sprinkled in there. So without any further ado, let's crack on, shall we? Alright, first up we have Dead Weight by Emily Klein. This was kindly sent to me by the publishers via the lovely people at Book Break. As you guys may or may not know, she a bigger bitch. And I have talked a lot about that experience on my channel and a lot about body positivity and body activism. It's something I'm very passionate about, but another thing that I'm very passionate about is non-fiction, primarily memoirs from the point of view of people who have experienced disordered eating in their life. Right off the bat, I want to make it very clear that disordered eating and the idea of fatness and it being accepted in wider society are two entirely different conversations, which though do have some overlap, are often thrown together by the media as always coexisting, as always being linked to each other. Dead Weight by Emily Klein is a collection of essays from Emily Klein's point of view as somebody who has struggled with disordered eating her entire life. And initially when I picked this one up, I was very into this book. It has a very different perspective and a very different tone from many other sort of essay or memoir collections that I have read on this subject. So being very clear in here, I did enjoy Emily Klein's voice as an author, and I do think that she had a lot of valid points. The problem with this one is, however, that she doesn't have enough valid points for this entire book, which is already quite short. The hardcover edition of this one only comes in at 288 pages, but despite that there were quite a few repeated points, and unlike other books that have featured quite a lot of repetition, it felt in this one not like Emily Klein had necessarily run out of things to say, but more like she really wanted to hammer her point of view home in as many different ways as she could fit in. I hate when it feels like the author is preaching to you or talking to you from a very static point of view in which their opinion is the most important thing in the piece, not necessarily what it makes you think or what it makes you feel or the conclusions that you then draw from your own experience. And on top of all of that, the author heavily quotes from other sources, which in a longer book wouldn't be a problem because there would be more original material there to kind of buffer it. But in such a short book, what you're essentially treated to is passages and passages from other people's point of view, which is not what I signed up for with this one. So unfortunately for me, this one is an and I really would not recommend it for the topic. I like how the sky outside is just reflecting my negative opinions of these books back at me. Weirdly, the next book along I have is Girl in Pieces by Catherine Glasgow. Now, if you are looking at this book and your reaction is, girl, why are you reading that? Do you know how old that book is? You were here on BookTube for the first time that book was popular, which is actually why it's kind of stuck in my brain. Prior to the exploding ankle incident, I spent quite a lot of time for a project wandering around not independent bookshops. Hearthstones, and having a look at the things that were on their tables. And one of the things consistently on the table was the anniversary edition of this book. I just kept seeing it again and again and again, and I was like, oh. I didn't pick it up in the first wave of this type of book, but there's something about it that's nagging at me. And so I was like, okay, you know what? I will see if my library has it. And indeed my library does have it, and they can keep it. I am so glad that I did not purchase this book with my own adult money. That's one of the things I've been loving the most about borrowing books from my library recently, is that books that I am really unsure about, I go there first. Not books that I'm like, oh yeah, you're definitely gonna love those, and there are definitely a few of those later on in this list, so that goes to show you how well I know me. But books where I legitimately am like, I'm interested in that, but probably for the wrong reason. So this book, I think it is safe to say, came out in that era of contemporary YA, which was filled with sad girls in mental institutions. It was a trend that was started and just didn't seem to go anywhere for a really long while. It was very indulgent in the actual experience of it. Nay, it wallowed in the descriptions of being depressed. And unfortunately, this book for me was just the epitome of all of those things. I read this one all the way from the front page to the last page, and I could not tell you why I should care about the main character. A lot of really horrible things had happened to her, things which as a reader I should have had massive sympathy about. Instead of having massive sympathy, I was just eye-rolling when a new thing was presented on another page. And I think this plays to the thing that I've talked about quite a lot in thrillers and mysteries, where it's just again and again depression, peril, fear, sadness, worry, and there are no top notes, there are no bright moments, there are no moments of humour, there's no moments to balance out these characters just wanting to do something other than be depressed for a little while. And apart from that, it was just absolutely saturated with tropes, and every single person in this mental institution who is not the main character is a caricature of some kind. It was like a lucky dip, and everything that you know from the media that is popularised about that disorder, that's that person. Just flip through a baby book, stick a name on it, that'll be that character. There are newer books which have done this conversation so much better, which are not getting the same kind of promotion as this is, and I think it's kind of weird. Another book that I think is kind of weird. So if you guys tuned into the first episode of my 68% diaries, and thank you to everybody who has and who has left me lovely feedback about it. Honestly, you just warmed my heart so much. But if you have already watched this video, then you have already seen this book, and you already know in quite a lot of detail A, how much of a disappointment it was to me, and B, how ick I found a lot of the things in it. And that book is of course The Examiner by Janice Hallett. Once again, thank you so much to the publishers for sending me a proof of this book, because it was one of my most anticipated books of the year. I have been such a devoted Janice Hallett fan. Loved the appeal, I loved The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels. I was kind of meh on the Twyford Code, but it wasn't awful. This one though, I think it's fair to say that everything that I didn't like about each of those individual Janice Hallett books were just present so much in this book. In fact, it felt like the only elements that were present were the things that I didn't like. And then there was the outdated and problematic stuff. Just for a little bit of context, this is a multimedia book. All of Janice Hallett's books are multimedia books, and from that point of view it was done really well. However, this book, unlike any of Janice Hallett's other books, really relied on this format like way too much. There were far too many academic memos. There were far too many bits and pieces of exams that they were doing and essays they were doing. There was actual essay topics and then full essays in there on the subject. And I am forgiving. I am a reader who does not want to work out the mystery. But one of the chief complaints that I've seen about this book from afterwards, from reading other people's reviews, is that they are so frustrated that there was no way for them to play along in this book. And that is because the reveal in the middle of this book makes no freaking sense. The entire reveal in the middle of this book relies on one character's disability, a disability which you did not know existed at any previous point in the book. It was so ableist and it was so clear that this, very much like Girl in Pieces, was like a stereotypical, this is how I as a non-disabled person person see this particular disability, how I think it should be portrayed, how I think that these people must feel about it, these brave, brave people. It was very much that, you know, like, oh, look at all of the adversity this character has made their way through, and yet despite that message they were still the butt of the plot point in this, almost the butt of the joke. But apart from those things, again, which I go into a lot more detail about in my vlog, there is just the fact that this book was boring. It was boring, it was filled with characters that I didn't like, and not in that way where you're like, I don't like you, but you're very interesting and you're making very, very cool decisions right now, or very bad decisions, you know, depending on what your flavour is. More just like, why is there a book about these people? I don't care about these people. I think maybe one more book. I think maybe the next book will be the decider, because you know me, I'm not backwards and coming forwards when it comes to cutting off authors that I'm just like, no. I do not like you. You make my eyeballs sad. Talking about making my eyeballs sad and also probably making a bunch of you guys sad, because there were so many people who were interested in reading this book after I featured it in a haul, that the minute that I knew this was going south I felt so guilty. And that book is of course Cloistered by Catherine Coldstream. And yeah, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a non-fiction memoir from a former nun who is supposedly spilling all of the beans on the backbiting and unsafe conditions in the place that they were cloistered in, their order of nuns. The start of this book in fact begins with like 3 pages of the author being like, I'm running, I'm putting it behind me, I've only taken what I can carry, I'm scared because there are lights coming on in the convent behind me, I am afraid that somebody is going to come out and see me running and pull me back in. And I was like, oh, I'm in. But unfortunately this memoir fell short of doing everything that it said that it was going to do repeatedly. There are some really, really beautiful passages in this book about nature and about what the physical world actually means to a cloistered nun who spends all of their life in one place. And so if you're looking for a narrative about that, Catherine Coldstream definitely serves. However, there are clearly, very clearly points in this book where the author is not only holding back, but I think actually like straight up obfuscating. She's not only not getting to the point, but she's watered down the point, because she's very clear from the start of this book that she is actually somebody who still loves religion and she doesn't have anything against the order that she was part of, but because she doesn't want to offend the order itself, she actually never really completely spills the tea on anybody in there. There were clearly abuses. There were clearly abuses to her, to other nuns, of seniority, of seniority, of resource guarding almost. You know, all of the things that as a Christian order you are not supposed to do in the whole loving thy neighbour spiel. These nuns were doing it. They were doing it to her and they were doing it to other people. But for some reason, even given this platform of this book where she's like, right, I'm going to tell you all, and the publisher's like, cool, right, tell us all, she doesn't. I never felt like we got to the real crux of what happened to her, and not to say that I felt lied to, but I did feel quite cheated. I did feel like she wasn't actually at the point in her life where she wanted to write this memoir, and so it ended up just being like a missed opportunity, and just kind of like, for what reason have you done this? Because the point, it eludes me. So yeah, I'm really sorry guys. I know a lot of you were very interested in this one and I was very excited about it, but I cannot recommend it with any part of me. I should also point out that I am aware that I'm like slowly slipping out of frame, and it's because of the ankle, because my leg's up and there really is no better way. So I'm aware that I'm like slumping away, but just assume that it's what the books are making me do, or that, I don't know, Big Bazooma's bad posture. Pick your poison. Next book that I have, speaking of picking your poison, that was a very good lead that I didn't mean to do. Look at me being themed. The next book that I have to talk about, nay trash, is Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. This was not a book which I was excited and enthusiastic about. It was a book which you guys were very excited and enthusiastic about me reading, and I don't know why. I don't know why. Because from all points of view, this book was just incredibly underwhelming. Now, I do come to you as a person who does not particularly like short stories, but it's not like I haven't rated any short story collections highly in my life. I have. It's just that they're very few and far between, and I don't often go into them without prior recommendation from people that I trust, which is how this one ended up on my TBR. I keep getting told things like it's so creepy and it's so gory, but it's so subtly gory, so you just don't realise it's happening, and then you're like, ugh. And I was like, I want to feel like that. I want to feel bleh, but it just never happened. This feels very much to me like Come Closer by Sarah Gran, where I'm like, what's wrong with all of y'all? Where you guys read them and you're like, oh my god, the horror's so bad, it's so bad. And I felt my skin crawling and my soul wanted to leave my body. And I'm just like, nah. Mid. The title short story collection is, of course, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. And to say that this story hinged on the most tenuous of concepts of two characters on a queer message board who met each other because one of them was selling an antique apple peeler. The most tenuous of connection, because fundamentally the concept of this book would have been no different if you just set it up with these two queer sapphics met on a kinky message board, because one of them really wanted to be mummy and the other one really didn't, and then it devolved into a huge abuse of power and some really gross stuff. Again, another summary so short and concise that I would say you could even skip this book now. So unfortunately this will be my first and last Eric LaRocca, which is good because I can't say the author's name consistently. For some reason it just doesn't work in a Scottish accent, so I'm glad that I'm not going to have to experience that again. Oh boy, okay. Next up, we're just going to talk about two books in one go. Two books that completely wrote an author off for me. And much like Janice Hallett, I am super salty about it, because these two books are An Education in Malice and Evocation, both by S.T. Gibson. And if you thought for a second that I had to look at my notes 4 times to get An Education in Malice as the title and to not say A Study in Drowning, then you were right. Ding ding ding, you win a prize, because these two books could have been interchangeable. In fact, not only were they interchangeable in like their settings and their plot lines, but they were interchangeable in the way that they used descriptions, the way that they built atmosphere or a lack of, and the way that, once again, with about this much information about a character, you were supposed to fall completely in love with them just from their aesthetic and their idea that studying is really cool. Yeah, so let's back it up a bit. I loved A Dowry in Blood, like a whole lot, and when Kirsty was here last year, she read it from my shelves because she knew everybody was obsessed about it, and she was like, I don't really see why you love this. And then I was like, oh, but there was great writing and it was about Dracula and it was queer. She was like, yeah, so? And now, looking back on it, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, yeah, so? And I don't know if it's because these two books have tainted my experience so much that I'm now looking at A Dowry of Blood through a different lens, or if it's just that I was being super generous to it, because as you guys know, retellings of classic horror are my jam. I love a twist on Dracula, a twist on Frankenstein, a twist on Jekyll and Hyde. Like, give me that. And that was definitely a book that fell into that category. So was that the thing that dragged it over the line for me? I don't know, but this is why 5-star audits to me are so interesting. Going back to your older books and like looking at how you feel about them now after you've had some space and some time and maybe more experience with that author or that genre, and more the fates are trying to tell me that I need to do that. But back to these two books. I wanted to DNF An Education in Malice in the first 3 pages when the entirety of the atmosphere was built on the fact that there were 2 groups of girls across the campus, one of whom who was wearing like plaid short skirts and like blazers, and the other group of which were wearing like boho stuff. And the main character was like, oh my god, so much diversity, I have never been around so many different types of girls in my life. It was literally atmosphere building 101. It was the definition of tell the reader how they should feel about this environment and not show them and therefore make them feel it. The main character in this was so incredibly insipid, so 2D, that they literally did feel like I could have slotted them into A Study in Drowning and you wouldn't have noticed the difference. Nobody was compelling, and then I started Evocation. And it was the exact same thing over again. I don't think that I have ever read 2 books which both need more pages so that the author can build the characters' relationships with each other more convincingly, and also need so many fewer pages because it was the same thing. Pages and pages and pages and pages of the same thing. Insta-love, oh, the insta-love is strong, but the insta-hate is also strong, which I don't understand as a concept either. I was not sold. It any point on the motivations of any of these characters. And while I understand it from a publisher's point of view, because there's definitely an audience for these books, I am definitely in the minority on S.T. Gibson. Lots of people are like kicking their little feet about it, and maybe it's just not for me. Maybe the genre is just not for me. But maybe it is that there's probably better representations out there, but they're not going to sell quite as nicely in a foiled cover as these ones will. That's my review. Hated not picking up this author stuff again. Very sad about it. Ooh, this next one's another really popular one, and I think this one might be the one that you guys throw rotten fruit at me for. I'm not going to be about the bush with this one. This is The Final Strife by Sarah L. Arifi. And I was so convinced by you guys' reviews and by people who I really trust, who our Venn diagrams are like so thick in the middle, thicker than me, you know, they're a good healthy chunk of queer and horror and thriller and stuff, that I not only had the first book in this series on my shelves, but I also had the second book, and I had them signed and in special editions, and I was just so excited, and I was so incredibly let down. So let down. The thing that I hear about this series the most is that it's like the most original new fantasy series to come out in ages, and while I think some of that definitely bears true in terms of the representation of other cultures that exist in our world but in a sort of like fantasy interpretation, but, and it do be a big but, I didn't find the plot of this book particularly original because, and this is no spoilers, it says it on the blurb, this is essentially about child swapping. This world has literal different colours of blood which determine your place in society, so it's a caste system, and the babies are swapped between castes to like upset the world order. That's not a new thing to fantasy, and in fact it is just the idea of like fae swapping out babies for their own babies and putting their own little demon fairy children into the human realm. It's an ancient concept, and I didn't really think that it was that revolutionary. But on top of that, the main character in this book, oh my god, I felt like it was Groundhog Day. We were just endlessly in this cycle of main character's life is awful, main character goes and buys drugs to deal with their life, main character does all their drugs really quickly, main character needs to find a way to get more drugs to deal with their awful life, main character does something stupid but still manages to get drugs, main character does drugs, repeat the cycle. And I mean, that was repeat the cycle to almost page 200 on the book, which was when I was like, I am out. I don't care. And I am not somebody who's like, I hate representations of drugs in my book. I don't at all, especially in fantasy environments where the substances can do things that our own can't do in the real world. In this book, a character comes back who the main character thought was dead, and they are so high at this point that they're just kind of like, ha, you're back. Well, does another drug. And it was just so anticlimactic, this moment, which should have been like, oh my god, you're alive, what the hell? Where have you been? How dare you not contact me? It just fell so flat. Couple those problems with the fact that the writing for me wasn't anything special. It wasn't anything that I was like, oh, even the writing's keeping me here. And the fact that there's fat phobia laced through this particular book, and I don't know if it carries on in the series because I haven't really been bothered watching reviews about further books. That was just enough for me that I was like, okay, cool, I'm out. And I'm real sad about it. I'm real sad about it. But I couldn't get on board, guys. I don't know what you love about this one so much. So that is it, my guys. Those were all of my recent bottoms, and I did warn you that it was going to be salty. It was incredibly salty. And you know what? I'm not sad about it. I don't feel bad about it in the slightest. Unhauling these books has made more gaps in my library for better books, objectively, in my not so humble opinion. Books which I shall hopefully love better than these. So, if you have got all the way to the end of this video, what I want from you is your favourite emoji of consternation. Either the little flat-lipped, flat-eyed guy, or the eye roll emoji, or the one that's just like, ugh. When you go to the favourites that you type to your friends, your closest friends on your emoji keyboard, I want that emoji. And as always, if you have read any of the books that I have trashed here today and you would like to tell me about them, whether that's positively or negatively, then please do so below down in the comments, because opinions live here and you're allowed to have a different one from me even if you're wrong. And of course, if you have any recommendation for books that do these things better, then absolutely also leave those in the comments for me below. If you are new here and you are holding out for a list of my tops from the last few months, then please hit that subscribe button. And if you are one of my returning subscribers who has found their skin to be clear cleansed by all of the salt, their crops to be watered and their skies to be clear, then please hit that like button on the way out the door because it really does help my channel. And I will speak to you guys really soon.